Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to discuss how to go about finding a great coach. So, in our previous episode, episode 11, we talked about all the things if you don't get support from friends or family members. So, today we're going to talk about whether you've decided to invest in a coach and how you can go about finding a great one.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about this because I think a lot of our episodes and interviews that we've been conducting so far have kind of not only been talking about, okay, as a client or as someone who is looking to better themselves in their fitness journey, what should you do? But also, we've been kind of talking about our perspective from the coaching side of things, which hopefully gives you guys a lot of good insight on, how we think and how we work things for you. And this will kind of be a deep dive into all of the things that we've learned along the way and honestly have had experiences ourselves with, coaching and or even just hearing from other people that we know about, horror stories with coaching. But I'm really excited because I think finding a great coach can be one of the biggest game changers in your journey. It can seriously just help you skip so many mistakes that we've made along the way trying to figure things out for ourselves, and that's why we've outsourced along the way to coaches, because we want to try to skip some of the mistakes that we would make if we were just doing everything on our own.
Yeah, I would say that investing in a coach was probably one of the biggest game changers in terms of my health and fitness journey. So that was back in 2015. I hired my very first coach and I learned so much from them. So the first thing to look for when you're trying to find a good coach, the first thing that we recommend to people is to do your research. And we recommend interviewing coaches, interviewing their clients, and don't be afraid to ask coaches questions. And I think it's really important to have a good coach client relationship and making sure that you agree with a lot of the same philosophies. So doing your research, maybe getting on their website, looking at their Instagram, maybe they have a YouTube account, and kind of seeing what kind of philosophies they have, the results that their clients have, and what their clients are saying about that coach.
Yeah, and I think, when I first hired my very first coach, I guess that was in 2016, was kind of doing that without really knowing that I was interviewing him. And so we exchanged a couple of emails back and forth, and I was asking about what his approach was like, what should I be expecting, what kind of a timeline does he think that I should follow for my contest prep, because I was actually hiring a coach for the first time to prepare for a show. So you might not be doing that. You might just be hiring a coach to look for guidance in your journey overall. But I think it's super important to just ask those questions, and maybe we can help you guys decide what are the right questions to ask, right? So I guess one of those would be, what dieting methodology are they preaching, or what do they use, right? Because there's going to be some coaches who are hell bent on keto, or there's going to be some coaches who brand themselves with intermittent fasting, or some kind of style of dieting, right? So if you are getting into a coaching relationship for the first time, make sure that that person aligns with what you're actually looking to do. So if you want to track macros, find a coach that helps you with learning how to track macros. If you want a meal plan, find a coach that writes meal plans, that sort of thing.
A registered dietitian who writes meal plans.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, writing meal plans technically in the scope of a personal trainer is illegal. So we don't do that, but there are people that do, and they fly under the radar, but we're not necessarily recommending that.
Yeah, so I think interviewing a coach and talking about what they view your timeline as is a really good thing to do, because one coach might have a very different timeline or a very different idea of what a season might look like for you. So Marissa and I, we do get, and we've talked about this in a lot of previous episodes, that we get a lot of clients who want to start dieting, but they are not in a position to diet. So the information we give them is oftentimes not what they want to hear, because we recommend starting a reverse diet, implementing more food, and not really going into a true dieting phase. But one coach might have a very different timeline from the next person. And just because one coach says that they can do it faster doesn't necessarily mean that that coach is better, but it just kind of gives you a better idea of how to plan your season. And if you're just a general lifestyle client, you can still get an idea of what maybe your year might look like. So, researching and asking what type of coaching, nutrition philosophy, what type of timeline, how they go about their check-in process. Some people prefer to have local coaches so they can meet up with them in person. Marissa and I have found a lot of success with online coaches. So I don't really think that, when I was first starting out, that was a big thing for me. I wanted someone who was local, who would be a little bit more hands-on. But something that we've talked about too with coaches is that your need right now might change over time, and that you might outgrow a coach and they might outgrow you as a client, and that's okay. That you can have different coaches at different times, and we don't recommend coach hopping where you have a new coach every couple of months, because at that point you're going to be spinning your wheels trying a bunch of different things. But it's okay if you need to move on from a coach and find someone who maybe is a little bit more advanced, or maybe you were diagnosed with a disease or PCOS, and you need to find a coach who specializes in that. So it's okay if you feel like you need to move on from a coach who you first started with.
Yeah, and I think the last thing that I want to say, probably before we get into like red flags that you should be looking for when you are trying to hire a coach, is listen to your gut. And that's kind of going to be the theme of all of these things. If something doesn't feel right, your gut will tell you. And I think a big thing that you brought up, Christina, that's really important, is making sure that that coach is looking out for your best interest. And I'm sure that we're going to touch on this more in this episode. But when you come to someone and you say, I want to lose body fat, but you're eating 1,200 calories a day and you are doing tons of cardio, you're not lifting weights, you're not in a good position to lose body fat. And while you might not know that, maybe you're in a place where this podcast that you're listening to is totally new to you, health and fitness is totally new to you, and you're just confused about all the information that you've been told along the way to this point. That's great, and we're glad that you're here. So you might not know what you don't know, because that's just how that works. But if you are approaching a coach and trying to hire someone to help you with your goals, it's very important to pay attention to that gut feeling and make sure you feel like and trust that this person is looking out for your best interest. Because like Christina said, we'll tell people no. We'll tell people, hey, yeah, you're really not in a great place to cut calories or try to lose body fat right now. We should try this other approach. But there are going to be coaches that will look at your intake form, see those things, and be like, well, I want to still turn this person into a success story. So 2 hours of cardio a day, here you go. And that coach might be looking, at themselves for, they want to stroke their own ego. They want to turn you into their success story, and they want to put your transformation up on their Instagram or their website. And so it's very important to just be wary of these things. And I think we'll go one by one through a bunch of red flags instead of just kind of brushing over.
Yeah. So to dive into the red flags, like Marissa was saying, the first red flag we have is a coach who takes more than 24 hours to respond to a check-in. So of course, things happen, things come up. Maybe your coach went on vacation or has something going on. But if they're taking more than 24 hours to respond every single time you check in, that's a red flag. And again, that's something that you want to talk with your coach prior to signing with them and ask what their check-in process look like. And they should say within 24 to 48 hours, they'll get back to you. But if they're constantly taking days, even weeks to get back, or maybe answer a simple question, that's definitely a huge red flag.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to just communication and communication skills. Like, the whole purpose of hiring a coach, big picture wise, is not here's your plan, go off, do your thing. There are people that do that, and this is why we're here to advise against it. But seriously, like, when you are hiring a coach, you are essentially hiring a mentor in your health and fitness journey. One of the main things you're going to take away from this relationship is communicating with that person and learning from them. And so if they are not open to responding to you in a reasonable time frame to answer those questions, then it's really important that you take mind of that, and also to pay attention to what you actually need. Are you the type of person that needs just here's your plan, go do it, or like, do you need that guidance? And most often, the first time someone is hiring a coach, they do need that hands-on attention.
Yeah, and you were just making me think of, some coaches will say that they have access, like their clients have access to them via text messages or maybe through WhatsApp or Voxer or something, and they will respond to their clients' messages pretty much all day, every day. And that's fine. And normally that comes with a higher coaching option. It's usually a more expensive option than people who maybe have like a Facebook group. And so you can ask questions in there. And that's something that I do with my clients is, if I, because I am a school counselor. And so I kind of equate it to being in a, you're in a classroom and the teacher is teaching and one of the kids raises their hand, they have a question. And so they might be really scared because they think that, oh my gosh, everyone is going to think I'm dumb. But then normally when you ask a question, some of the kids are like, whew, like I had that question too. Or someone's like, well, I didn't know I had that question, but now I really want to know the answer. And so when the teacher explains to the kids, well, it's not just that one kid who maybe would, if he was too shy and asked the teacher after class, getting that information. Now everyone gets that information. So that's one of the reasons I like utilizing a Facebook group, because not only are they going to get feedback from me as a coach, but they're also going to get feedback from other clients who maybe have been in that position before or can offer their insight. So that's one of the things that I really like. But as far as check-ins, definitely within 24 hours to respond.
Yeah, and I think that is a nice little segue into something that we've talked about before, where there are coaches that have a lot of clients and maybe they give a little bit less attention to each of those clients, but that's the framework of their coaching and that's what you're signing up for, versus coaches who are more low volume in terms of the number of people that they handle, and they give each of those people a very high amount of attention. And so if someone is a higher volume coach, they have a lot more clients, the Facebook group is a really good way to kind of provide a community and provide support from the other people on that person's team. And so I really like the Facebook group aspect as well. So not only am I communicating with my clients one-on-one, but we also have Facebook groups so people can ask those questions and get answers from not just me, but from other people on the team. And I can think of one specific example where I actually had no idea what the answer to a question would be. I think someone posted, hey, I'm training for, running and strength training specific goals. When I'm on my runs, I notice that my thighs chafe because it's summertime and I'm wearing shorts and it's really uncomfortable. Does anybody have good tub rub like recommendation? And I was sitting there like, I'm so glad you didn't ask me this one-on-one because like I don't run. So like how am I supposed to know? Like I literally do not run. And so I had no experience like dealing with that training for any kind of endurance event. So a bunch of people chimed in and they were like, oh, I love this brand and this brand. And not only was it super helpful and insightful for me as a coach to now see some answers moving forward if I get that question again, but also that sense of community was provided around, hey, it's not a shameful thing to need tub rub when you're training for an endurance event. And I don't know if that's the actual name of the product, but like that's what they were calling it.
Tub rub, that sounds legit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that also is it's a good segue to, maybe your coach doesn't answer questions directly. So this might be in the form of a check-in when you're like, hey, do you have any good anti-chafing products? And Marissa could have been like, I don't know. So maybe she just was like, well, I don't want to tell my client that I don't know. And so she just brushes over and just doesn't answer the question at all or address it. Rather than if the client had asked her that directly, Marissa could have been like, you know what, I don't know the answer to this, but let me find out. Or there is some coaches might say, if you ask hey coach, you lowered my macros, or you increased my fat and decreased my carb intake. Like, why did you do that? And if a coach just says, because I said so, or because I'm the coach, or you just need to trust the process, well, then you're not really learning anything. And that coach is not telling you why that they are having you do the things that you're doing. So I don't like that in a coach. I think that a coach should be able to say, you know what, I'm, increasing your fat intake and I'm decreasing your carbs because I want to see how you respond to a higher fat intake. Or, you know what, you responded this way last week, so this week I'm going to try something new. Or, I've had really good responses with previous clients, so this is what we're doing. And I think that you should always kind of be in the loop of why your coach is having you do the things that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that when you go into a coaching relationship, like I said, it's not here's your plan, go do it, don't ask questions, just follow the plan to a T. Like that, I think that's an older coaching model that I think is still perpetuated to an extent, but is a little bit less prevalent because online coaching has gotten a lot more advanced over the past couple of years. But when you're going into one of these relationships, value the education. That person that you're hiring should be there to teach you what they know. And I think that it's really important that your coach doesn't try to withhold information from you, because ultimately, all information about health and fitness is out there on the internet somewhere. No one has any magic secrets, even if they say that they do. And so, if they are not willing to tell you the reasons why you're doing something, there might be a chance that maybe they don't know why, or maybe it's just because it worked for them, so they're trying to make money off of having it work for other people. um, and so value the education and the relationship with a coach that you're hiring. So that's really something that you should be looking for, is someone who's willing to teach and willing to give you the information and the tools that you need to be self-sustainable. And I think that that is really, really important when you're looking to hire someone, because you could easily get into a very negative cycle of feeling like you need that person, and you need to hire them all the time, forever and ever, because otherwise you will, you'll lose the secrets, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And Marissa and I, again, we talk about this all the time. We would rather have a client who asks 10 questions in a check-in rather than someone who's like, okay, coach, like, here are my pictures, here's my food. See you later. Because we feel like a client who's asking questions, they're taking control of their health and fitness, and they're trying to utilize you as a resource, and they want to learn. And it shows that they're being an active participant in that coaching relationship. So that's one of the things I love. And I tell my clients that up front is, I want you to be involved. I want you to be showing interest. I want to answer any and all questions. I never want you to feel like a burden, because again, like our whole goal for our clients is, like what Marissa just said, is we want them to be self-sustainable and be able to have the tools that they need to be successful on their own. And so I think it's really funny, but I always tell my clients, I feel like a mama bird, and eventually I want to push the birds out of the nest and have them fly. And if they ever need to come back because maybe they have an event like a wedding or something coming up, and they just maybe feel like they need a little bit more accountability, or they want to try something different, they can always come back. But I never want them to feel like they have to stay in the nest for the rest of their lives.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's what I talk about all the time, is we build our coaching model off of basically losing client retention. Like that is how we work. And so, like, obviously we have two separate businesses, but I think we run our coaching businesses very similarly. And one of my main things when I'm advertising, whether I'm talking on an Instagram story, or I'm making a post, or kind of having a conversation with someone in a consultation call, is I make it very apparent up front that I don't want you to be here forever. And that's nothing against you. I probably will end up loving you as a person and as a client, but I don't want anyone to feel dependent on me. And if someone feels dependent on me, like they can't stop hiring me, then I'm doing something wrong, because ultimately our job is to teach you everything that we know, or at least do our best to try to. And so when you are being an active participant in your journey, you're taking those tools and you're actually, retaining that information and learning how to apply it on your own. And so my goal as a coach is to create the empowerment within you to essentially go off on your own and be able to do this. And when someone finishes their 3 or 6 or 12 months with me and they say, I'm so excited, I feel so empowered, like I know exactly what I'm going to do. I just had a call last week where one of my clients was finishing off and she was saying all of these things. I was just lit up inside. And it seems like this backwards business model, right? Because like, how are we going to thrive off of this as coaches? But I think we could even speak to other coaches who might be listening to this. It's going to spark referrals. It's going to spark this confidence in that client so that they start talking about how they know what they're doing now, and their friends and family might become curious. And I've gotten so many referrals from friends and family because of the changes that one individual has made. And so I coach someone and then I coach their mom, or I coach someone and then I coach their brother. And like, that's how that chain works. So it's not like if you're a coach listening to this, you shouldn't feel like you need to make your clients feel dependent on you to keep making money. I think that's a very destructive business model that only ends up hurting you in the end.
Right. Yeah, I love what you're saying. It does seem like a backwards business model where you want to have clients kind of, in a sense, graduate from your programs and go off on their own because you make less money than if they were to continue signing up with you. But it's like you said, it's just having that, maybe, I don't know if it's like ethical or like moral kind of business model, but going about it that way. So when we were talking about having our clients be active participants in their health and fitness journey, and maybe you are that type of client and you're asking your coach questions, one of the red flags is having your coach who degrades you or maybe even makes you feel dumb for asking something. So like, again, let's go back to the chafing example. So if someone was like, hey Marissa, do you have any products or recommendations? And maybe Marissa goes like, this is not something that I am should have to answer for you, or like maybe Google it, or I don't know, something along those lines, or like, I can't believe your legs chafe when you run, or something along those lines. But just overall, like you feel like maybe like a burden to your coach, and that's never how you should feel, because again, you are a paying client, you are paying your coach to be a resource for you. And granted, I do think that there are some things that you maybe should try to Google first. Like if you are like, how many carbs are in this slice of bread? Well, I feel like you should be able to maybe do a little bit of research on your own to try to figure that out. And if you can't, maybe ask in the Facebook group, or if there's something, if your coach has that, or if there's something that is like very personal and you feel like you need to ask your coach directly, then of course do that. But you should never have someone who makes you feel bad about wanting to be an active participant in your journey.
Yeah, and I think, that line between what is hand-holding too much versus what is, giving someone the proper information. I think that's really important because, like you said, how many carbs are in this slice of bread? Like, you can look at the label, or like, how do I take this pre-workout? Like, have you read the label? Have you, looked at the dosages? Familiarize yourself with anything first before asking the question. And so there is a very gray area, I guess. I was going to say fine line, but I think it's just a very large gray area with like what is asking too much and what is being self-sufficient and what is warranted. And that's tough too, because it'll vary depending on the individual and how long they've been working with you, or like how experienced they are with things. But I think it all goes back to being that active participant, right? Like if you're engaged and you want to get better, then you're going to take the steps to try to learn things on your own. And then when you get stuck, you're going to, refer to your coach. And, the answer might be as simple as, oh, well, have you tried searching that up with this keyword? And sometimes, actually not sometimes, a lot of times, I answer questions with questions, because one of my main goals is to not just be an encyclopedia, because that breeds dependence. So yes, we want to educate the client, but oftentimes that comes with teaching clients how to ask the right questions to themselves, to be critical thinkers, and to figure out an answer on their own, because that is really the education, is giving someone the tools to be able to figure out what they need to do. And there's going to be times and places where they have a question, they get a direct answer. Absolutely. But I think it's definitely a much larger gray area than we want it to be.
Yeah. And one of the things that I should have written this down, but I had a couple different thoughts that, again, we go back to different types of coaching styles. And we talked about some coaches who give their clients, almost 24/7 access to them in terms of communication. And I know that, again, some coaches will just have that as a higher ticket offer, that if you were the type of client who needs that, then they can offer this at a higher price. But I think it's also important when you are first starting off in that coach client relationship. There's probably a little bit of a learning curve, and you kind of need to get to know their style, and maybe you have some questions in so Marissa and I, we both offer our clients little like info, like welcome packets, and it's everything you need to know, check-ins, what to include, kind of how our philosophies are with nutrition. And there are oftentimes where clients will be like, hey, I have a question about this, or I have a question about that. And so in the beginning, it might be that you are a quote unquote, like maybe a little bit of a needier client. And that's okay. Because again, you're both learning how, both of you operate. And then eventually, again, you might get to a point where you're just a little bit more self-sufficient. You're able to do things on your own. But I think one of the questions I ask my clients on a coaching call is, hey, what do you feel like you would need from me as a coach? And I think that that's something that you should ask yourself beforehand, before you start researching coaches, because maybe you do feel like you are a more hands-on client and you might need a little bit more of that. I don't want to say hand holding, but you might be a little bit, you want that extra attention. Or Marissa and I feel like we are very hands off, in a sense that we just kind of want to go off and do our own thing. And that's not to say that we're not following our coach's guidelines or directions, but we just know that we're a little bit more, we're able to go off and do it on our own. So we know that we don't need to pay maybe for that extra service or that extra access or means of communication. So I think that's important to sit down and maybe think about what you feel like you would need in that coach-client relationship.
Oh yeah, that's huge. I think, thinking about what is it that I'm going to take from a coaching relationship. And I ask almost the same question now that you say that. I say, what are you looking for with coaching specifically? Um, and so, when you're looking for that accountability, or you're looking for more guidance, or more hand holding, or more support, everyone's going to be really different in that way. So like, for example, I think one of the words you might have been looking for, Christina, was we're more autonomous. But I think that comes with our level of experience in the sport of, being able to manage our macros and go train 5 times a week, every single week. But like, we've done this for a number of years. So like, knowing where you're coming in is really important too, because if you know that this is your first time ever trying a healthier lifestyle change, that learning curve is going to be steeper, and you're going to need more one-on-one hands-on attention at the beginning. But then again, once you kind of get into a rhythm, you get into a groove, you understand how things work a little bit better, then maybe you progress to something that's a little bit more hands-off. But one thing that I really want to just harp on before moving on is, when you are on that learning curve, and when you are growing and learning and being more, I guess, needy, but not in a negative sense, one of my biggest pet peeves is the, hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but, or hey, I know this might be a stupid question, but, and I think that goes back to, coaches making you feel bad or dumb for asking something. Maybe you've had negative experiences with that in the past, or maybe that's a trend in your workplace or at home with family. And I hate that that's a thing, but it's so prevalent. And more often than not, when I get asked questions, I'm getting asked that with that preface. That makes me really sad. But ultimately, that's not how we want you to feel. And hopefully, our clients that we work with learn to not be shameful about asking questions, no matter what it is.
Yeah, and that was one of the things, you just made me think of this. But when you're talking about how we're a little bit more autonomous, that's not to say that Marissa and I don't ever go through periods where we do need some more hands-on help. And I equate this back to maybe something like peak week. During peak week, I get a little needy. I have a lot of questions. I'm anxious. I want to make sure that I'm on track and I'm looking good. Or there might be that we have times in our life where we're going through something, and we might need a little bit more reassurance, or we might need a little bit more of that extra help. And again, that's okay. And I think that, again, your coach should be able to kind of go with you on your journey. And whether, it doesn't mean that you always have to be doing really well, and you always have to have really good check-ins. And if something bad happens, like, you can't tell your coach because you don't want to let them down, or you don't want to disappoint them. That your coach should be there with you through the highs and the lows, and be able to help you through those low times if you need a little bit more help. And so I don't want to continue to harp on that for a long time, but the next kind of red flag we have is someone who maybe just gives you a PDF and then just sends you off. And so that's not a coaching relationship. You just got a plan, or maybe that's more like a program, but that's actually not coaching. If you're not able to check in, if you're not able to ask questions, and you never hear from your coach again. Because I know that there are some coaches out there who have done that. Your coach ghosts you.
Yeah, and I think that plays into the conversation we've been having a lot with, like, make sure you're hiring someone that is open to a lot of communication, teaching you, education, allowing you to be an active participant, et cetera, et cetera. And then one thing that I did want to touch on is, with, how Christina just said, maybe you feel like you need to have really perfect check-ins all the time. That's not what this is about. So I guess the word for it is performing. A lot of clients get kind of like into a performance mode with their coach, especially at the beginning. I see this a lot. The first couple of weeks are really, really strong, and then we start to see the reality of this person's life. And I think one expectation to be had with a coaching relationship is you're not signing up for this to just nail it the whole way through. That defeats the purpose of needing support. So when you are hiring someone, it's really important to just be transparent with your barriers, your struggles up front, because a lot of times we get this like performance anxiety of like, oh, like I have to send in a perfect check-in. And then the first week that it's not a perfect check-in, the client will just skip the check-in, or try to hide, or try to redo the week for themselves. And so one thing that I really try to encourage is making sure that that person checks in no matter how bad their week was, no matter how little they did, like compared to what they were assigned to do. And yeah, it sucks, but that's facing the music, that's facing the accountability that you signed up for. And so when it comes to finding a great coach, it's important that you are looking for someone who's going to hold you accountable in a positive way when something like that happens, when you have a bad week, when you're struggling with something, and they're not just, again, degrading you or making you feel bad for what you didn't do. And so positive communication, constructive criticism, and just, having an open and honest relationship with that person, I think, is the overarching theme of like what you should really be looking for. But yeah, that performance anxiety, or that need to perform and be perfect, especially at the beginning, is something I see a lot.
Yeah. And again, this was not something that we had necessarily put on the outline, or something that we were going to talk about, but I think it is just really important is, and again, there's that kind of gray area, or that fine line, where you want to have a coach who is encouraging and who is going to help you during those tough times. And when you have a less than perfect check-in, but you also want someone who's not going to be like, oh, well, that's okay, like try better next week. You also want a coach who's going to kind of hold you accountable for your actions, and say, okay, well, this is something that we didn't get done this week. How can we make this better next week? Or what can we do? And someone who's going to hold you accountable and try to help you through that process, and make sure maybe next week you do have a better check-in. So it is tough to have someone who you feel like is not trying to be too hard on you all the time, but someone who isn't just going to hype you up for breathing. So the next red flag we have is a coach who gives you quote unquote supplements, or who tells you to take certain things and then doesn't give you any explanation. And again, I think that this is when it comes, like, your job as a informed consumer is to do a little bit of research in what these supplements are. And there are some coaches who do, PED protocols, and that's something that they do within their coaching. That's something that they like to utilize with their clients. And that's something that you can ask when you are researching your coach. But I would never take a supplement that you don't know what it is, what it's supposed to do, and whether it is a performance enhancing drug or not.
Yeah. And I think that one's pretty straightforward is, make sure you're reading your labels, make sure you are not taking something that's unlabeled or looks like it's from the black market. If that's not something that you want to do, right? And so I think it's really important. And that goes back to because I said so, we can't just be having blind faith in someone. And I think, it's funny because we develop these relationships with our coaches and we trust these people, so it's very easy to get into a position of blind trust. But I think when it comes to supplementation, or it comes to doing something that's a little bit outside of just manipulating your diet and your training, it's really, really important to always be and stay skeptical. Not so much, of course, that it just looks like you distrust the person that you're working with, but I think there's a healthy amount of skepticism that you can use in these situations, because it's always important to know what you're putting into your body, why you're doing it, and you can definitely approach that in a positive way.
Right. And again, if your coach says, hey, I think you should start taking a multivitamin and omega-3 and CLA, and maybe throw in some creatine, and it's okay for you as a client to say, why would you recommend me to take these items? So that's okay. And that's not you second guessing your coach. That's just trying to be an informed consumer. So the next red flag we have is, let's say you've done some research and you have reached out to a coach and they set up a sales call, or just, a coaching call to go over some things. And then they get to the pricing and it is crazy expensive. So again, some coaches have very, very high, high ticket prices or high ticket coaching. And again, it might just be with their coaching services. Maybe they offer a lot of services. So maybe you do have 24/7 access to your coach. Maybe you are having, I don't know, I feel like if you're paying $600, $700, $800 a month for coaching, you better have like weekly or daily Zoom calls with them, or something. But yeah, so sometimes, just having a coach who is really super expensive, or if they have really unrealistic promises where they're like, oh yeah, we can totally lose 50 pounds in 2 weeks. Like we can do that. Or, oh yeah, we'll have you looking like this in no time. And that's a kind of a red flag where it's like, something's just not adding up here.
Yeah. And I think, so let's put some numbers on that, right? So like, what is a high ticket price? Because there is the industry standard of how much coaching typically costs across the board. And roughly $250 to $500 a month is the industry standard for online coaching. So if you're seeing something in that range per month, it's definitely not going to be something that's blowing you way out of the water. But when we start getting into the $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $900,000 per month for coaching, you really got to break that down, right? Because, so let's do some math here. If you break $500 per month into, like, let's equate this to in-person training. If you were to go twice a week for 4 weeks for that month, you would be paying roughly $62.50 per that hour session. So about $1 a minute. And that is pretty standard and honestly on the cheap side for a lot of in-person personal training. So that pretty much would roughly equate to something like that, except now you're getting your plans for 7 days of the week for, the entire month, and all of that hands-on communication. Online coaching and in-person training is very different, but, you kind of can compare those things. And, if you broke it down to, $500 a month and you are getting daily guidance and access, that's a huge deal, right? And so you kind of have to look at it that way. In addition, but I think it's very important to know what your budget is going in as well, and maybe get a sense for what this person's pricing looks like beforehand. So this is something that I set up as a filter from the get-go. So I've kind of flipped back and forth between what I have my website look like and how I have my intake form, because this is something that often is a barrier to entry is cost. And unfortunately, like, that is, dependent on how someone budgets their money and what they deem worthwhile for their health and fitness. But I put my pricing on my website, just written out, so that if you're on my website and you're looking to inquire, you probably have already seen that. And so I'm kind of just removing that barrier from the conversation. We're not getting on a call to talk about prices. Typically, when I get on a call, someone's seen my prices, they've worked out the numbers, and they have understood what that's going to look like in their budget. And they're basically just telling me, hey, I want to do this duration of time and this service, and here's why. And we talk about that. We see if that's the right option, and then we go for it. Same thing with like the intake form. The intake form on my website used to be name, email, message, and I would just get random messages that were like, help with diet from Sally, and like that was it. And that's not helpful. So now it's a long form, and that's on purpose. It's to weed out anyone who's not serious about taking control of their health and fitness. So having those things up front, I have found to be very helpful for me on my end, but also gives the client coming in a lot of clarity before we even get on a call. They know what they're getting into, they know what they're paying, and they know it's not something, outrageous. And so when we are talking about sales calls, it's like, if you're going to get on that call, you have no idea what it's going to cost. Be prepared for that person to try to, pitch you something and then throw a really high price tag on it. That might be a little, I guess, scammy in a way. I don't know how else to describe it, but
Yeah, I think scammy is kind of the right word, but I think the other on the other end of the spectrum, if you were to have a coach you for free, you're going to be less likely to show up because it's not costing you anything. There's no loss if you don't follow through. So coaching is an investment. And so there does need to be a little bit of a monetary exchange. You need to pay your coach, again, because you are paying them for a service. They need to be able to put food on their table. But for you as a client, that makes you that much more likely to show up and stay on track. So I think that while $6, $8, $1,000 a month is pretty expensive, even $50 a month, that's kind of on the other end of the scale, not really fair for your coach, and it's not fair for you either.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be, depending on the person, you might need to be pushed a little bit more out of your comfort zone with your investment, and that might be with your time, that might be with your money. But if you're pushed to really budget to afford your coaching, that could be a positive thing. Maybe you're getting more priorities laid out in your life, and maybe like because this is, maybe strapping you for cash a little bit, in a way that is reasonable. Maybe you're that much more inclined to really go all in on it. But then on the other hand, there's types of people who, that's not really an object to them. And maybe, them making the investment, yes, it furthers their commitment to it, but maybe they're not the type of person that really needs that. So also identifying like how that motivates you is important as well.
And another thing I think just to point out really quickly is sometimes you are paying a higher price because you're paying for a specific coach. And so there are certain coaches within the industry, they're very prestigious and they have a lot of backing for their coaching services and they have very high demand. So they in turn can raise their prices because the demand is so high and so many people want to work with them. So they have to find a way to kind of cut that off. So you, like, let's say, for example, you want to join a specific team and you really want to work with the head coach. Well, their prices might be a lot higher than maybe working for one of their coaches within their team. So that's something to keep in mind, is sometimes you are paying for someone's background and their prestige in the industry.
Yeah, reputations.
Yeah. So another red flag is if you, let's say you send a check-in to your coach and maybe your coach responds back and they misspell your name, they forget your name, they call you something different, or maybe they just don't even remember what happened last week. They are just kind of making mistakes and you're like, well, wait, because last week you told me this and now this week we're doing something totally different. What's going on? That might be a sign that your coach has too many clients and they're just kind of drowning in their work and they're starting to make mistakes. They're getting a little bit sloppy. Your coach should know who you are. They should have a very good idea of your plan and what the approach is going to be every single week.
Well, also, let's just take this to like a valuing yourself perspective, right? Because a lot of people just let that go. They're like, oh, well, my coach is busy. Like, it's fine. It's not fine. You deserve to be paid attention to. And that is why, you made a monetary exchange to be hired by someone and to be taught by someone. So I think one problem that we have in this industry is not just that there are coaches who will take advantage of people like this, but that people allow this to happen. So if you're listening to this and you're trying to hire someone, you need to know that you are worthy of being valued as a client, and you can't just let those things go. You have to make sure that you're getting the attention that you paid for. And if you're setting those expectations up front, you can keep that in a written document. It might be in your contract. Make sure that you are getting delivered everything that you were promised to be delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't feel afraid to kind of stand up for yourself and confront your coach and say, hey, coach, you said that X, Y, and Z were going to happen and this isn't going on. What's the deal? And that's okay. The next red flag we have is you have a coach who has you on dangerously low calories. Maybe they have you on a lot of cardio or just like extreme amounts of volume. And again, I think this is a little bit different because there is a big difference between a competitor and a lifestyle client. And competitors, it might be a grind for you those last couple months. You might be doing quite a bit of cardio and you might probably you're not eating a whole lot of food. And if it's not for a prolonged period of time, it's probably okay and what you need to do to get down to those low levels of body fat. But for a general lifestyle client, you don't need to be eating 800 calories a day. Even 1,200 calories a day is very, very low. If you have a coach who has you on less than like 30 or 25 grams of fat, those are all really big red flags. Or if they have you doing an hour of cardio, something's not right. And it might be that they want to just make a quick buck off of you and have you be a very easy success story. And, again, when Marissa and I talk about getting those clients who are like, I want to diet and they're already eating super low calories, if we just wanted to take their monies, we'd be like, okay, yeah, absolutely. And then we'd put them on a really extreme diet. They might lose a little bit more weight. And then you would be like, okay, you lost 10 pounds. See ya. Like, and you're probably going to rebound. They're not setting you up for a reverse diet or to be able to maintain or like to be able to actually live a sustainable lifestyle. So all of those are just things that you want to avoid.
Yeah, and I think this is a big distinction between what coaching is and what just giving someone a plan is, because you have to have those expectations set up front. So if someone says, I'm already eating low calories, but I really, really, really want to lose fat, and you have a conversation and like this is all that matters to that person, and so you're like, okay, well, if you're not going to budge on my suggestion to go the opposite direction, then, with a reverse diet, then okay, I will push you, but it's only going to be for this amount of time. And, if it doesn't work, then we go with my way. Right. And that might be a compromise that I reached after, some back and forth. And ultimately, like, I am there to serve the person and their needs and their wants. I will tell them what's in their best interest. I will try to tell them no. But like, maybe there is a point where you can reach a compromise, but you have to set those expectations up front. And so if you know what you're getting into, with a contest prep, for example, yeah, it's going to be really, really, really tough at the end. But, I think there's a big difference between someone just taking advantage of your willingness to push and grind, and having actually a productive conversation and relationship to make sure that you are going into something knowledgeable, coming out of it healthier than you came in. And again, that person is looking out for your best interest. So they're not afraid to tell you no. They're not afraid to tell you, that they don't think something is a good idea, and, really trying to work with you on that. And so I think that's something that you should really be looking for, and not taking pushback as something being wrong with you, or, something like that, but, being able to have those constructive conversations.
Yeah. And the last red flag we have is very recent to what's an allegation that has come out recently. So it is January 31st, and just a couple days ago, something came out, and I don't know how to say this person's name. I've never heard of them before, but Mandis Buckle. So there were some pretty serious allegations that have come out surrounding this coach, who he had been doing some pretty inappropriate things with his female clients. So if you have a coach who makes you feel uncomfortable in any way, who maybe asks you to do some inappropriate things or pushes boundaries, like maybe requiring you to wear certain things in your check-in photos, or not requiring you to wear anything, or having you send pictures on the side, maybe text messaging, or your posing sessions are just not right, that person is probably some sort of predator, and they're taking advantage of you in some way. So again, like Marissa was saying at the very beginning of this episode, it is okay to trust your gut. And if something feels off or not right, then it is okay to end that coaching relationship, or to not move forward with them. And the only reason that this all came out is this guy allegedly had been doing this with hundreds of females, and this coach was bullying them in a sense, saying that he was going to ruin their careers and the NPC and IFBB, that they would never be able to compete again. And so he was using his power and prestige in the industry as a way to manipulate these people. And so it only took one person to come forward, and then everyone else came forward. And before you know, the IFBB and NPC has actually kind of kicked them out, or kicked him out of their federations. So if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't even heard of that, but that is crazy. And I believe it, because I have had clients who have come to me, and I had one in particular who, she mentioned that her coach had asked her to send her progress pictures completely naked in the past. And it's like, oh, justification is I can't see all the definition in your muscles unless you send it, completely naked or whatever. And I think that's totally inappropriate. And I think there's a very large difference between having standard check-in guidelines, for example, like a sports bra and like your underwear, or like if you're not comfortable with that, a bathing suit bottom, or something. Like if you're even not comfortable with that, like I will allow people to wear shorts. It's definitely not ideal. Like there is a certain amount of skin that kind of needs to be shown to see certain progress. Like if you're coaching a bikini competitor and you need to see their glutes, that is, unfortunately a part of the coaching relationship, and maybe it makes people a little bit uncomfortable at first, but that comes with knowing what you're getting into with the sport. But there's a very large difference between that and, abusing someone's willingness to please you as a client, and trying to take advantage of that.
Right.
Unfortunately, it happens far too often.
And that's not to say that as a female, you can't have a male coach, because I've had 3 different male, I've actually only had 1 female coach within my years of coaching. But I've always had very, very, very professional relationships with them, and I've never felt uncomfortable in any way with them. So that's not to say that if you're a female that you shouldn't reach out to a male coach, because there are a lot of great male coaches within the industry. And same thing as a male, that's not to say that you shouldn't reach out to a female coach. That if there is someone that you really vibe with on a lot of different philosophies and just personality wise, that's okay to reach out and have that relationship, to not be scared, but to know that there are some not so great people in the industry who are looking to take advantage of people.
Yeah. And I've had only only male coaches as well. So definitely have had only professional relationships there, but unfortunately it happens.
Yeah. So this is a good transition to go into the good things to look for in a coach.
Really, but
Yeah. No, I think so. Just because it's like, all right, we wrapped up the kind of like real bad, real bad. So let's go into the good to end on a high note.
yeah, let's change the tone here.
Yeah. So you want to find a coach who listens and doesn't just talk. So someone who is able to hear what you are saying, to work with you, be able to be flexible, and not just, again, like Marissa was saying, be an encyclopedia or just reiterating Google. That you want to find someone who you feel like is actually listening to you and being able to really customize your coaching. And it's not just this like cookie cutter, well, everyone does this and that's just what we're doing.
Yeah, and I personally, this is something I have to be conscious of and that I have to work on, because it doesn't come from a place of just wanting to lecture someone, but like when someone asks me a question and I like feel like I have a good answer for it, oh my God, I want to answer. I want to give you the answer right away. I want to help fix your problem immediately. And I think that's an instinct that a lot of coaches have, is like, oh, you're coming to me with this problem and I really want to fix it. So let's fix it by me telling you the answer. But oftentimes the client might already know the answer and there's some other reason that they're not able to change their behavior or do something different or adhere to the plan. So this happens a lot, where now I find myself, and this is something that I've only learned through experience, because there were many years of, well, I haven't been coaching for that long, but like, in my 5 or so years of coaching, first couple of years, I was the fix it gal. I was, hey, if you have this question, I have this answer. And, if that answer doesn't suffice, then, maybe you just don't want it bad enough. And like that, unfortunately, was kind of the beginning of my coaching career. But as I've learned and matured in this, it's a lot of times you just have to, like I said, answer questions with more questions. And this goes into motivational interviewing. So this is a specific skill that coaches will use and therapists will use to help a client come to their own conclusions, or help a client to reflect on something so that they can better understand themselves. And at the same time, I will better be able to understand them. So a lot of times it's like, hey, Marissa, I can't stick to my macros because I was, presented with all this good food and I couldn't say no. And I will ask a question like, okay, well, why do you feel like you had to give in to those temptations? And then maybe we get into this whole spiel about how this person is all or nothing, and maybe we need to start implementing moderation more often, or variety. And, so that's one example that is a pretty common one. But, asking questions to respond to questions is sometimes my way to just get an even deeper understanding of someone. And so when you are in a coaching relationship, it's not just, oh, here's my problem, can you give me an answer? It's something more along the lines of, here's my problem. Okay, I hear you on that. That's totally valid. Can we talk a little bit more about, how this is affecting you, and maybe ways that you think that you can better approach this problem? And that leads to such a productive conversation in comparison.
Yeah, and I have found the same kind of in the similar ways of asking clients questions is I'll be like, so it's again, it's that, there was a lot of food and I was presented with it and I overate. So I might say, okay, well, was there a time in your past where you were presented with the same situation and you were able to overcome it? What did you do? What was different from this time till last time? And they might be able to come up with some solutions on their own, rather than the coach saying, okay, well, here's what you do, da 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 da. So it's like, if you have a client be able to elicit solutions, that might make it a lot more powerful coming from them, and having the client be the one who came up with the solution. So I think motivational interviewing and those type of techniques are really good, rather than here's a plan, here's a PDF, go off. But I think we had this conversation with Dr. Fandaro when we were talking about the behavior change and the motivational interviewing, and it was a really, really good podcast, which will probably be coming out after this episode. But we would highly recommend you guys to listen to that because she was super insightful.
Yeah, and I think that's so important is getting that client buy-in. And
Mhm.
oftentimes, that's how I get someone to better adhere to their plan is, okay, well, how many days per week do you think you should be working out? And what do you think is realistic for you? When they tell me, oh, I want to work out 3 times per week, then they have now declared to themselves their commitment, and they made that decision. And so they feel the buy-in of like, okay, I was a part of this decision-making process. So I now feel more inclined to follow through on it. Whereas if that same client who maybe had an expectation for themselves at like 3 times per week, and I gave them a plan and I said, here's a 5 day per week plan, go do it to a T, this person's going to be straining themselves and they're not going to be encouraged to follow through on it. And so I think hearing your client, well, actually, we're talking about client hiring coaches, but find someone who hears you and is listening for your input, not only when you are expressing struggles, but even like in the process of building your plan, you should feel like you're a part of that process.
Yeah, I love that. And then again, that's kind of building off of everything that we spoke about before, but you want to have a coach who, when you do ask questions, and again, maybe it's a very specific, do you have any product recommendations for anti-chafing? You have someone who can say, they're not afraid to say, I don't know. But let me find out, or let me do some research. Or let's say you do have a specific question and you have a coach who's able to give you very thorough answers. Because again, I think there are times where you do need to ask additional follow-up questions to elicit more information, but it's okay to be in that role of teacher or coach where you can give answers and give out information and they're thorough, and you're making sure and you're checking in with your client, does that make sense? Do you understand that? Does that sound reasonable? So they're able to work with you and they are able to elicit information for you when you ask, rather
Yeah.
than because I said so.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And like when we're talking about, maybe I have a client who doesn't know exactly how they want to approach their diet, right? And so the first thing that I'll probably do is ask, well, like, would you like to hear a couple of options that some of my other clients use? And that might not really seem very important because it's, one question, whereas otherwise I might just jump into, okay, well, here's your options. But just asking for that buy-in. And again, the episode with Dr. Fundero that's going to be coming out, we touch a lot more on this. But just the act of saying, yes, I would like to hear those options, that opens up that client's mind. Now they're ready to receive information, and then I can go on and talk about all these different things that we could do and figure out what they think that they would want to do as well. So yeah, I mean, that could be that is a whole nother episode that we have pre-recorded, but yeah, that's a great one. And I think just making sure that the client, again, is a part of the process.
Right. And I feel like, again, that transitions really well into the next point is you have a coach who wants to know you as a person, and then you're more than just a number. And again, if you have a coach who's listening to you, who's working with you, who wants to know your motivations behind your transformation, or wants to work with you and hear you, and that's someone who is really invested in your journey, rather than someone who just takes your money every month and you don't hear from, or you hear from sporadically, who misspells your name or makes you feel like a burden. That you have a coach who actually enjoys working with you and values that coach-client relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that we talk about the personal things, because so often they trickle into everything else. There's nothing in our fitness journey that happens in a bubble. It's not like diet and training happen in a bubble and everything else is completely separate of that. That's not how it works. Our work, it influences our ability to schedule our workouts or to get to the gym. Um, Stressors at work influence our energy and our sleep quality, because we are stressed by deadlines. So we're up at night and then we get crappy sleep and then we skip the gym the next morning. These things all trickle into each other. social events with friends, family, or workmates, that might play into our diet and our nutrition or our ability to stick with it depending on the culture that we're in. So, it's all so intertwined. So if we don't know what your personal life looks like, that's a problem. And like, that doesn't mean that, you need to tell me all your secrets. Like, but like, that means that I need to have a better, at least a basic understanding of what your life actually looks like. Because if I'm working with a college student, it's going to be very different than a single working mother, right? And so there's just a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration with knowing someone's context and yeah, more than just a number. Like, yes, coaching pays my bills, but that doesn't mean that I view my clients as just a means to an end.
Right. And something that you made me think of when, again, we go back to that client who goes, okay, coach, here are my pictures, here are my numbers, like, see you next week. That doesn't give us a lot of information to go off of. And like Marissa's saying, it's not like we're like, hey, you got any secrets for me this week? We're like, oh my gosh, what's going on with Rebecca at work? Did she do anything like crazy this week? We're not looking for like tea or gossip or anything like that. But, let's say I have a client who's, my cat is meowing at the door. If you can hear it. Oh my gosh.
It might get cut out, honestly, by the filter, but we'll see.
But anyway, you might hear my little monkey chirping in the background. But let's say you do have a client who sends in their check-ins and everything looks perfect on paper. Like they're hitting their macros, they're hitting their workouts, they're doing their cardio, but maybe we're seeing the scale increase. Or maybe we're seeing some, inflammation. We're seeing some stress indicators. Maybe you're having not as frequent bowel movements, or maybe you're having more frequent, less loose, or you're having loose stools. And that might be an indicator of, okay, what's going on? Like, how's your sleep? How is your stress? Like, is school going okay? Is work going okay? Like, what's going on with your family? Like, is there anything that you can tell me? And then you might have a client who's like, oh yeah, well, actually, like, I just lost my job, and like, my grandma is not doing very well, and she's in the hospital, and I've been with her every day this week. And, I'm breaking it, or I'm in a breakup with my boyfriend. And you have all of these things where you don't see that on paper. And so it's like, okay, well, we need to step back from the fitness and nutrition side of things. And we need to try to mitigate your stress right now. And we need to figure out how we can help that, because like Marissa was saying, everything doesn't exist in their own world. Everything is connected. And so there are often times where there's a lot of stuff that we don't see on paper, but if we're able to know you better as a person, we're better able to help you. So a good coach should be interested in all of those things.
Yeah. And it's about, you need to feel invested in. You are investing money and time into a coaching relationship. So, use that to the fullest, right? Invest your time, send a thorough check-in, talk about things that maybe you don't think are directly relevant to your journey. But maybe they are, maybe because it's super stressful and it's impacting your progress or your ability to adhere. And that kind of goes into, the performance aspect is like, clients don't want to sound like they're whining or complaining because things are hard. They want to sound like they're crushing it and they want to be the favorite. But oftentimes it's those conversations about like, okay, well, this isn't going well in your life. So like, let's take a step back and adjust things. That's where the relationship really grows. And so it's not about turning in a perfect report card. And I totally get how it can feel like, you want that report card to look perfect because, you have maybe a little bit of shame associated with filling out the day that you blew your macros out of the water, or the day that you skipped your workout and, didn't track your food. But, that is where the accountability is had. And that is where you really learn to find your weak spots and then grow from them.
Yeah, I love that. So the last thing, kind of the good thing to look for in a coach is someone who has your best interest in mind and who's really looking overall at your health. Because like we had mentioned before, it's really easy for a coach to get someone who wants to start a dieting phase, take them and run them into the ground. And they might get results from this and you might lose your 10 pounds, but you are left off in a really bad metabolic position. And maybe you don't have any tools to reverse diet. Maybe they've just left you on your own. Maybe you're doing 2 hours of cardio and you don't know what to do to kind of get yourself back into a healthy state. So again, we talk about that timeline that you want to talk with your coach and say, hey, what is the next 6 months or 3 months, however long your package is, what do you think this next year should look like? And you want a coach who's going to take a lot of things into consideration to come up with the best plan that's going to help you reach your goals, but do it in a healthy manner.
Yeah. And that, I think to add on to that, the fitness aspect of your life should be adding on to your life and should be worked around your life. And a coach who expects you to wrap your entire life around fitness is not looking at the bigger picture. So really, you want to be able to have these tools and implement them in a way that you can do that and also live your life and be productive in your life and be successful and not feel like you're bending over backwards just to get all your workouts in or to manage your diet. And so that's where the sustainability comes in. That's what we're all about here. And seriously, like it's so important that you set those expectations up front. Ask the questions for the timeline. Make sure you're having the conversation of, well, yeah, like I want to do this bodybuilding competition, but also like my wedding is like 3 months before it. So how do I approach that? Because I want to enjoy my wedding. Something like that, right? And so making sure that you have someone who's willing to cooperate with you on all aspects.
Yeah. So that kind of wraps it up. So we talked a lot today about red flags and things that you should kind of look out for in a coach and avoid. And then the last shorter portion of the podcast is talking about things to look for in a coach. But Marissa, one of the things that I'm kind of upset about was, and our listeners don't know, is this is our second recording of this podcast. And I'm really upset that we didn't work in our Stairmaster joke.
I know, it was so good and so natural the first time. So we were talking about how when a coach says, I told you so, that's not a good enough reason. So I came up with, this example out of nowhere. And I said, yeah, so when your coach says, go run backwards on a Stairmaster with a booty band around your head and yelling and
chanting the team name
while you're doing it. And you say, why should I do that? And they say, because I told you so, or because it's the best way to burn fat. Everybody knows that. So we just picture like someone doing that and chanting like Marissa Roy Fitness, Marissa Roy Fitness.
Y'all, I died laughing probably for like 30 seconds straight because I just had this image of like someone with Marissa's like team logo with a little booty band, like Team Marissa Roy Fitness.
I know. I like wanted to work that in organically, but
no.
It's just the second time around, it's just not as good. But I'm glad that you brought that up because the people needed to hear it.
Yes.
So if you're at the end of this episode and you made it all the way through, then you get that special treat.
So yeah, guys, we hope that this episode was beneficial and gives you a little bit more insight into what to look for a coach. And hopefully you feel more empowered to make a really good decision that's going to benefit you for the future. So we hope that you guys enjoy this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christi Lynn Fit and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.